All right, great. So let's go ahead and bring on our next speaker, Dr. Jody Armour. Uh, Dr. Dr. Armour is the Roy P. Crocker Professor of Law at the University of Southern California. He has been a member of the faculty since 1995. Armour's expertise ranges from personal injury claims to claims about the relationship between racial justice, criminal justice, and the rule of law. Armour studies the intersection of race and legal decision making, as well as torts and tort reform movements. He is the author of many books, one of which I cannot say on this screen. Um, the list of all of his books are actually on the website for ourrevolutioneastbay.org/townhalls, and also going to be on the YouTube and Facebook pages for the video. Dr. Armour, are you unmuted and ready to go?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Great. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to launch in with really why my book has an unsayable title. It has the N word in it, N asterisk GGA theory. And I mean for that to have a bite to it, to have teeth in it, because it is what we've done with criminal justice for over 50 years, right? We've demonized, otherized, monsterized, and N-wordized, all right? Black criminals in general, especially Black criminals. And one of the things that I'm trying to really drive home with this research, latest research, is unless we are able to fundamentally change our moral framework and our moral compass when it comes to criminals in general and Black criminals in particular, we're never going to be able to make deep cuts in racialized mass incarceration, right? That's the basic premise that I really kind of want us to keep considering and trying to drive home. One example, you know, these have been some outstanding histories in the folks who preceded me. And one of the things that you noticed is that there really was a time in this country when our conception of justice itself was about retribution, retaliation, and revenge, you know, and it was unabashedly so, unapologetically so. When I wrote my first book in 1997, Negrophobia and Reasonable Racism, I was talking about racialized mass incarceration. I was jumping up on tables and hollering about it. And the response I was getting was a big yawn from a lot of folks, or a talk to the hand from many others. And many of those people who were saying, talk to the hand, or all you're going to get in the way of a response from me when you tell me about racialized mass incarceration is a yawn. A lot of those people were Black people, and as well as non-Black folk, right? When you look at the polling data in the 90s, I used to always debate Randall Kennedy, a Black Harvard professor law. He was taking a more conservative stance than I was on these issues. But one fact that he was always able to point out, and I could not deny and refute whenever he did, was, and this was 97, 98, that polls they were doing in Black communities were saying that Black folk were saying at a 70%, 75% rate sometimes that they wanted more police, more jails, and more prisons, and longer sentences. All right, and poll after poll, and he would say, so you know, this is the community spirit speaking. This isn't just, you know, somebody like you trying to tell the community how they should be looking at crime and punishment. And you also, just to remember what those days were like and what's really at stake now, you know, the fact that we have to change the moral framework itself. Another very popular routine in the mid 90s that I partly named my book after was by Chris Rock, Bring the Pain. Goes back in front of an all-Black audience just about in Chocolate City at the time. This DVD used to be in just about every Black home I went in back in the mid 90s, late 90s. He went back and forth in front of this Black audience and says, it's like a civil war going on in Black America. And there's two sides. There's Black people and there's N-words. And N-words have got to go. I love Black people, but I hate N-words. Boy, I wish they'd let me join the Ku Klux Klan. Shit, I'll do a drive-by from here to Brooklyn. He goes on like that for 30 minutes, distinguishing between lovable Black people and condemnable N-words. And his core definition of an N-word, by the way, when you go through his whole list and distill, morally condemnable Black criminal. That's it, morally condemnable Black criminal, right? That's what you see coming out of it. And by that definition, and you know, the audience, by the way, was laughing, the whole, you know, this huge audience was amening, hunting, and preaching, you know, saying preach, you know, while he was saying all this and rolling in the aisles, making the butt of these jokes, Black criminals, right? And at the time he was even saying that, I put this in a recent article, and they said, Professor, this number sounds hyperbolic. We're gonna need a pinpoint site. So we got the pinpoint site. Up to 90% of the young Black males in some of these inner city neighborhoods are gonna wind up in jail, on probation, on parole at some point in their lives, and some of them, right? He was saying, and the audience was accepting the invitation to say that up to 90% of our own community are N-words, morally condemnable N-words that we're going to otherwise distinguish and distance ourselves from, you know, accept the political invitation implicit in the punchline to distinguish between a morally condemnable them and an upright us, you know, wrap ourselves in the politics of respectability that represents, and that's really at the heart of that distinction. Bill Cosby was famous for that same way of thinking. Then now we're into the early 2000s, you know, moral frameworks. Bill Cosby, again, NAACP Image Award. He feels comfortable in 2004 to talk about, you know, his pound cake speech, saying, oh, people are upset about that Black kid getting shot over taking some pound cake, getting shot in the head over taking pound cake. Well, why did he take the pound cake? I've been hungry. I've looked in the window. I've seen pound cake. I didn't take it. You know why? Something called upbringing. That was the moral framework people were embracing in those times. And they're still out here, but we've seen a shifting in the Overton window. But I want us to remember what it was like not that long ago. You know, we get to 2012 and you start seeing some changes with the California voters. Thank God the voters lead the way with this. But for a long time, you had somebody like Jackie Lacey in LA County prosecuting an 18-year-old boy. This is in the mid-aughts, okay, 2000. Prosecuting an 18-year-old Black boy, goes into the back seat of an unoccupied car and takes a cell phone from it. Unoccupied car's back seat. And when he was 16, he had 2 purse snatching incidents. She got 25 to life, right? Didn't bat an eye. When the judge, in a rare feat of judicial intervention, said, this shocks my judicial conscience, you know, after a couple of years, he sat on it. He said, I'm going to try to knock it down to the 7 years you initially offered him. So she was, you know, this is part of the trial penalty. She objected and fought it and with support. That's how she became the #1 DA in LA County, because that was the morality, that was the moral compass, that was the moral framework that was driving criminal justice policy: retribution, retaliation, and revenge, right? That was the conception of justice that reigned. And every time there was a Megan's Law or a Jessica's Law, you could find some vulnerable victim that you could then publicize and say, Willie Horton style, let's make, you know, this a campaign for more draconian punishment, harsher, you know, sentences, right? So that's been the pattern. We know it's going to come again. We know it's coming, right? We know with the reforms that, you know, George Gascon and Chesa Boudin and Larry Krasner out in Philadelphia, they're doing the right thing. They're doing the only thing that makes sense, that's rational, that's right? But there's always going to be a risk of somebody doing something wrong. There's always a risk of error. There's always a risk of error. And what happens when in the Willie Horton case, for example, in Massachusetts, this is the 1988, just many people may already know this, 1988 presidential race between George Bush Sr. and George Dukakis, and Michael Dukakis. They're running against one another. Out comes a Willie Horton ad about a Black recidivist who was, that's how they characterize him, a Black recidivist who was on furlough. And while on furlough, a very humane program that had an over 99%, and I'm not exaggerating, well over 99% no incident rate, by the way, this program. He gets out, rapes a white woman, ties up her partner, and stabs him. And that torpedoed Michael Dukakis' campaign. Every politician I saw started on the Democratic side as well as the Republican side, but especially the Democratic side now started running from the crime issue. Bill Clinton, 94 crime bill, Biden, the architect of mass incarceration. You know the story after that, right? That we've all kind of wrapped our arms around this retribution, retaliation, and revenge approach, and Black punishment, punishing Black people became political currency that you use to gain and hold office, right? The harsher, the better. And so remarkably, we've seen I time it around 2010, I started seeing a shift. I used to go to NAACP conferences and talk about civil rights issues, and they were hardly talking. They were talking a little bit about criminal justice. I'd be there with a few other people making a few noises at the table, but mainly the civil rights agenda in the 90s, 80s, 90s, and aughts. A lot. You go to these conferences, it'd be, affirmative action, workplace discrimination, housing discrimination, worthy causes all. But Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, helped a lot more people to recognize mass incarceration as a civil rights issue, not just an issue of bad people making bad choices, that none of us have any responsibility for, but a civil rights issue. Whoa. And so you really started seeing things like, 2012, Proposition 47, Proposition 57, marijuana legalization, the voters leading the politicians, the voters with the propositions leading the politicians. They're getting out here and saying, we see the problem with what we've wrought. Even though we were leading the nation earlier with the 3 strikes law, we've seen the problem. So now the question is, and this is kind of where I kind of wrap it up now, for now anyway, is how do we maintain this shift in the moral framework that we've seen from retribution, retaliation, revenge to restoration, rehabilitation, and redemption, right? That's the move. And the new conception of justice that many are fighting for, and we have to really make work and make happen, is this shift from retribution, retaliation, revenge to restoration. What does that mean? And how do we do that? Rehabilitation, faith again in that, and redemption, recognizing the possibility for redemption. You see, and I'm going to look at, say, George Gascon's directives to his DAs here in LA. When I went through them, you could see this shift in the conception of justice right there in each directive, from retribution, retaliation, revenge, to this new moral compass, moral framework. Now, how do we make it stick? How do we reinforce this new moral framework while we have it? How do we support people like Chesa Boudin, like Larry Krasner, like George Gascon down here, and trying to get their DAs and many judges, and then I'll wrap up with this, recognize that many DAs that he's in a battle with now, George Gascon, he's in a battle now with all these DAs who are saying, oh, we don't want to follow these directives because we're not following the law, or that gives us too much discretion, or they're trying to fight back, and they're looking for any judge to help them fight back against these reforms. And why, may wonder, are they making it so personal? Because it is personal. What they are being told, and what a lot of judges are being told, by the way, is that your conception of justice, the one that you believed in, the one that you pursued zealously for 30, 40 years, tethered your personal identity to, as well as your professional identity. That conception of justice was wrong-headed, morally obtuse, and led to disaster. All right. And now we have a new conception of justice. All right. And we got to get on board with this. We look at people differently. We make moral judgments differently. We don't look at people just so much toxic human waste to be dumped somewhere. We're looking at people as people, with human frailties that make mistakes, but also that can be reformed, and et cetera. Right. And they are finding that personally devastating. It is an existential threat to them, right, to have to deal with this kind of shift in the Overton window, right? And so that's what I'm hoping we can talk about some too, and getting to the next issue. I'm sorry if I ran on a little too long.
Oh no, that was perfect. You ended exactly on time, which is great.